Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Deborah Young, the CEO of the RegTech Association, and I'd like to start our proceedings this afternoon by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we are convening this meeting and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and offer a very warm welcome to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander friends here with us today. And a very warm welcome to you, to our members and to our special guests. Before we get started, if I could just ask everybody to, you can leave your cameras on, but if we do run into any bandwidth issues, it'd be great if you could just switch those off, and if everybody could remain on mute, and the only exceptions to that are the speakers, and I'll invite them to the virtual podium as we move through. So welcome to RegTech Matters. This program was designed to inform, inspire, educate and connect people in our ecosystem. So thank you very much for making the time to attend. You know, we've gained a lot of momentum, and in this program that we've got for you today, we have, could I ask everybody to put themselves on mute? That would be great, thank you. We've got nearly 280 people online today from 15 countries. And we've got roughly an equal representation between buyers and sellers on the line, which is fantastic. And as I was saying to some of the speakers before we started today, this is very different from when the association first started, when it was lots of vendors and no buyers. So it's fantastic to see where we've come from. Last week we launched some new research, and I'll be touching on that a little bit in the beginning of my presentation today, but some really interesting insights were gained from this, and that is that institutions are shifting towards a buy rather than build approach, that there's been phenomenal growth in the number of RegTech deployments over the past 12 months, and we've identified that conduct risk, AML, CTF remain the top two most common RegTech solutions in the market today. So this is all very timely and relevant to the discussion that we are going to embark upon. The association has a really super important role to play here in educating people and showing the application of these RegTech solutions in real life and collaborating with regulators. So that's why we are here today. So I'm going to kick off with a bit of a RegTech 101. I'm then going to introduce Richard Lee from AUSTRAC, who has joined us. Thank you, Richard. And then we're going to present 3 case study examples from First AML, Napier and feedza. These are not sales pitches. These are really great case study examples showing how RegTech is being applied in practice. Okay, so here is what is on the agenda, and I've only been given 15 minutes, so I better get cracking. Next slide. Thank you, Hong. So here's the evolution of the RegTech Association, and I think it's important that we start here because what was happening 4 years ago, there was no easy way for our community, which wasn't even a community back then. It was disparate groups of people all trying to make sense of this. And what the association has done over the last 4 years is help all of them come together to collaborate, so we can have sensible conversations in a safe place like we are doing today. And you can see that we started very small, and now we have around 180 organisations that are part of our organisation. Thank you, Hong. So a couple of years ago, we sat down and wrote this strategic plan, and there were 2 goals, overall goals in mind, and that was that we do what we can to accelerate adoption of RegTech, and in doing that, we create a global centre of excellence. And so we have 4 main strategic objectives. One of those snuck in about 18 months ago called COVID-19, and that is helping our members navigate this crisis. That we advocate for the value of RegTech, and that we look to expand and explore new markets for RegTech and export opportunities. And last but not least, facilitate and encourage investment into the sector. Thank you, Hong. And this is the wonderful community that we have built. That map is available on our website if you would like a copy. Thank you, Hong. So I thought I'd start with what is RegTech. So RegTech is short for regulatory technology, and I still hear people talking about RegTech. This is not like Reg as in your Uncle Reg. This is actually short for Reg, which comes from the word regulatory. And it's the application of a range of technologies that can help improve the way businesses manage regulation and compliance. And it can do this not only in financial services, but any other regulated industry vertical. Thanks, Hong. But where I like to start this conversation is talking about trust. And if we all take our hats off, our corporate hats for a moment, and just think about ourselves as consumers, we all are operating and we presume trust in our dealings. And that could be trust with our bank, could be trust with our energy provider, could be trust with our telco company. But in our interactions, there is this presumption of trust. However, we all kind of know that in the back of our mind that this can break down for a variety of reasons. And this is why we believe that RegTech is a really important part in helping give consumers that confidence and that layer of trust, but also helping institutions build that trust into their interactions with their stakeholders. And I'll talk about that in a bit more detail now. Thank you, Hong. So RegTech can not only bring that safety and confidence that I've just been speaking about, but it can also bring productivity, efficiency, and the lowering of costs. Thank you, Hong. You'll have to excuse me, I don't know why, but now I've got somebody whippersnippering outside my front door, so I do apologise if you can hear any background noise. What is really important here is that RegTech can provide real tools for people working in compliance, people working in risk, people working in legal, people working within regulators. This can actually provide them with real tools to surface the risks earlier, to provide more transparent information to their leadership, their management teams, their boards, their customers, and their stakeholders. Thank you, Hong. So why is RegTech critical for regulated entities? I've highlighted those first 2 points on there as the burning platforms. The cost of compliance is increasing, and that number keeps changing by the day, but you can see in 2021 it was $287 billion US, and that was just for financial services alone globally. The regulatory fines are increasing. In 2020, $14.2 billion. So these are the two burning platform issues, and we've just collected some research which suggests that they're absolutely right, and it's what keeps regulated entities awake at night. I've talked about it's critical for regulated entities because these give access to tools that provide that transparency. They can deliver superior outcomes for customers and shareholders. But last but not least, it can actually help build stronger and more sustainable business, which is good for the entire system. Thanks, Hong. So we think about RegTech as an enabler and an accelerator rather than a disruptor. RegTech companies are usually founded by ex-industry practitioners, and this is a point of difference. So if we could meet face to face, or if we encourage everybody to turn on their camera a little bit later, what you will see is this very rich universe of very experienced people who have lived these risks firsthand, who have identified the pain points and who have then gone on to realise their second career by founding a RegTech firm that is addressing some of these problems. RegTech can be sector agnostic, as I've just said, in terms of how it's applied, and it's also technology agnostic. Our members would use a whole range of different technologies to deliver those solutions, and we don't mind what they are as long as they're getting to the heart of solving the burden of regulation and compliance. So it could be artificial intelligence, it might be natural language processing, it could be blockchain. You may also hear from time to time the word subtech or souptech, and that really refers to the word soup or sup is from the word supervisory. So this is when RegTech is referred to in a regulator's use case. So we would say that the underlying technology in SupTech and RegTech are actually the same thing. It's just a different use case. So just to clarify that. Thanks, Hong. And this is who, when I talk about the RegTech ecosystem, and I won't call out every single thing on this slide, but this is who we would generally be referring to when we refer to the RegTech ecosystem, all of the different stakeholders, and there they are listed. Next slide, thank you. And something that comes up a lot, we have a RegTech taxonomy, and we went to quite a lot of trouble to develop this as a way of being able to categorise RegTech, and all of our members are actually categorised along these lines. In fact, if you look at our directory, this is how people are categorised. And this is really important when we are having conversations with people, that these terms and the way that they're categorised is really well understood. And you can see that some of the taxonomy is risk, and some of it is functional roles, and there's a couple of other filters that you can see on our directory as well. But this also enables us to have a global conversation around RegTech and for it to be really, really well understood. So having a way that we can talk about RegTech is really important. Thank you, Hong. I wanted to touch on really briefly what we are seeing in the industry right now in some innovative approaches by regulated institutions on how they are consuming or entertaining RegTech. There's no doubt that a lot of the public programs that we run have actually been a bit of a godsend for lots of regulated bodies, because they're able to sit in a safe place and observe some of these presentations that we do, and we'll be doing some today, but they're able to sit from afar and actually just observe and think about these examples that are being presented to them, or in the case of our showcases, some of that information that's being able to present to them so that they can work out how that might fit for their organisation. But when they're ready to do a deeper dive, we have also run programs and seen appetite for bespoke in-house problem statement approaches, where the banks will come to us and say, here's a problem statement, we want to solve it, and we want the RegTech Association to help us curate the right RegTech or the very best RegTech in the world to come and address those problem statements. Then what we've started seeing is an extension of that even further, where one bank has actually partnered with a number of their other correspondent banks from around the world. They've agreed a range of problem statements, and they're going to run a global finance collaboration challenge. So that's also interesting, an interesting new approach. But the last point on there is one of the things for those middle two to happen is this whole idea that what we really need is internal alignment from those institutions on the problem statements, having their technology departments, their security, IT security departments, their procurement departments, their risk departments, everybody truly aligned before they can actually assess their need for RegTech and for our association to be able to bring them the right kind of providers. Thank you, Hong. For those of you on the line that haven't heard me say this, this is a slide from some research we did last year with Boston Consulting Group. You can see that Australia punched way above their weight globally in RegTech. We're the third largest product development nation in the world. So we have lots of it around us. And so we use this slide a lot when we're looking to influence government and others on the power of RegTech. Thanks, Hong. I just wanted to quickly touch on a couple of key points. We've just launched some research. If you haven't seen it, it's available. This banner is actually sitting right on our website. If you click on it, it'll take you through to the report. The industry has remained very resilient through the pandemic. RegTech right now is creating jobs rather than taking jobs away. We are seeing more sophisticated investment flowing into the industry from venture capital, from angels, from even private equity. There's been some reasonably strong M&A activity happening as well, which has actually meant that we've lost a few members because they have been purchased. But that is a show of strength and a maturing of the industry. 2/3 of our RegTechs have reported strong revenue growth from the financial year 20 to 21. There's been lots of new and unexpected opportunities. We have seen a marked reduction in the time to value. So from the time of the first conversation, with a potential customer to the actual deployment, significant reduction there, which means that we are seeing some acceleration of adoption. And then what we saw in the research as well was an uptick in full production deployments over the last 12 months, which is fantastic. Now, I may be running out of a little bit of time, so let's go to the next slide. And I might actually just cherry pick a couple of these. You will receive a copy of this slide deck, and plus this is all in the report. Look, procurement still remains the #1 challenge. But on the good news side, we've absolutely seen an uptick in particular in financial services, the pitch to win ratio. So where RegTechs are pitching to banks and financial institutions, they are winning much more of that business than they were in 2019. We've talked about growing jobs already. Client resources and prioritisation of within institutions are the most common challenges after the POCs and trials have been had. Next slide, thanks, Hong. But I wanted to quickly show you this because this is relevant to our discussion today. You can see that as a result of the research that we've done, you look at the top 2 risks there. So conduct risk is actually crept in, and it appears, and this is just from that data set, but obviously AML CTF is still right up there, but we've seen conduct risk also creep right to the top of the risks addressed. Thanks, Hong. Next slide. I've talked about the pitch to win. There's also a little bit of a challenge around, do you charge for POCs and trials? We're starting to see a bit of an unhealthy shift there around less people getting paid for POCs and trials in this, and we're going to do a deeper dive to try and unpack that a little bit more. Next slide. This is the buy versus build chart, which is actually quite an important chart, where we are definitely seeing a shift in the attitudes for financial institutions to buy rather than build their own solutions, which is great news to all of the RegTechs on the line today. Next slide. And this slide here shows where our focus is going to be for the next 12 months. And I won't go through all of this, but I'm happy to offline any of the detail on this slide with any of you if you want to get in touch with me. But we will definitely be having a focus in beefing up our capacity and our capability around research. We are looking at a mapping exercise now because ESG is really high on corporate institution agendas right now. So we're looking at how we can align the RegTech offering with ESG frameworks. We're looking at growing our partnerships. We're continuing to advocate with government, but also to look at government as a buyer. We'll be continuing our work with regulators. We are looking at expanding our footprint in financial services, and that's actually starting to look beyond the top tier banks and starting to look at second tier institutions and also those ancillary industry pockets where we have not been focused to date. We're also going to start looking at energy and telco sectors because they're the next 2 sectors that will roll off on the consumer data right. And last but not least, there's a new kid on the block called Workforce Management Solutions, which is very much part of the RegTech family. And we think that this is going to be RegTech's play into the small, medium business sector. So I think that is my last slide. Is it not, Hong? Yes, in fact it is. So it is my great pleasure to introduce you to Richard Lee from AUSTRAC. Richard is the Director of Industry Education and the Outreach team. He's been with AUSTRAC in regulatory leadership roles for over 10 years and has regulatory and law enforcement experience through prior roles with ASIC and APRA and the Australian Federal Police. His team's role involves providing guidance to reporting entities to help them build their capability in meeting AML and CTF obligations and managing ML and TF risk. The team also plays an active role in supporting RegTechs who develop solutions relating to anti-money laundering compliance. And I'm going to invite Richard to come to the podium. And just before I do that, I wanted to say that we're going to use the chat function for questions. So if you could pop your questions on the chat, also identify who you are, in case it's not obvious, and also who your question's directed to. And I'm going to encourage the speakers to go online and answer those on the chat. And from time to time, you're also going to see some polling questions coming up. If you could answer those, we'd be much appreciated. And Richard has also offered, if we can't get to all the questions, he's also offered following the session to take some of the questions offline. Thank you, Richard. I'm sorry to interrupt the start.
Great. Thank you, Deborah, and thank you to the RegTech Association once again for inviting AUSTRAC along to one of your events. Today, I'm planning to give you a snapshot of areas that are our focus at present or in the recent past. And if there are areas that does take your interest, you can check out a lot more information on our website. So the areas I'll discuss today will be around the transformation of our own systems, a few legislative changes that have occurred back in June, the current financial crime environment, and finally what we are doing with the RegTechs at the moment. Before I start, though, into that detail, some of you may have very little knowledge of AUSTRAC, so let me give you a 30-second crash course. We are Australia's anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing regulator. We have a dual purpose. We regulate those businesses captured under the AML-CTF Act, and we operate as Australia's financial intelligence unit. Now, in Australia, we are unique. We are one of the very few organisations in the world that combine the two functions, and that has many benefits. We regulate over 16,000 businesses, and our regulatory purpose is twofold. Firstly, we strive to have a financial system free from criminal abuse. We therefore aim to build the capability of reporting entities to make them as resilient as possible to being exploited by money laundering, terrorism financing, and serious crimes. And these crimes are very broad. They can range from narcotics trafficking, fraud, tax evasion, online exploitation of children, wildlife smuggling, and many more. And secondly, we require reporting entities to report certain information to us, including international funds transfers of any amount, threshold transactions, so they're your physical cash transactions of $10,000 or more, and suspicious matters to us. So let's start with the Systems Transformation Program. In the 2020-2021 federal budget, AUSTRAC received funding of around $104 million over 4 years to deliver major upgrades to our industry-facing technology and communication systems. Now, the businesses that we regulate use that system to do things, to report those reports I just mentioned, as well as other interactions to do with their enrolment and registration. So fairly active use of the systems. We're currently completing the discovery phase of the transformation with an aim to deliver a modern, engaging and user-friendly portal that will improve businesses' reporting capability and provide more self-service options to help businesses meet their obligations. Now, to date, we've run a series of workshops, one-to-one interviews and surveys with users of our current systems to understand what works and what doesn't work, not working as well as it should, which has provided great insights into current pain points as well as opportunities to improve how businesses engage with and report to us. We've identified the top 4 pain points as the design of our suspicious matter reporting report and the process, user experience and user interface navigation, guidance and support that's available, and the need for greater automation and introduction of an API. Now, the priority issue the group identified is for new systems to be easier to navigate, provide an experience more tailored to different businesses, and the ability to access previously submitted transaction reports. Over the course of the system transformation program, we will continue to collect and review feedback about how we can improve processes and user experience with our systems, of course. Now, the team responsible for driving this program are keen to hear from RegTechs involved in AML as to what they might want our new and improved portal to do and what it should look like. And we're intending to give RegTechs access to the portal, including technical specifications and access to the test environment, although of course, that won't be obviously for some time. At this point, we're keen to hear from any RegTechs that may be interested to be part of our customer advisory group to ensure we build something that works for everyone. Now, the customer advisory group receive monthly updates on the progress of the program and are offered opportunities to participate in workshops and surveys on particular topics. So if you'd like to participate in the customer advisory group, please email have-your-say, that's one word, have-your-say, at austrac.gov.au, and that information, that email address is available on our website with a bit more information. Very quickly, I'll talk about some legislative reform. Amendments to the Act occurred in June, and these amendments further respond to recommendations of the statutory review of the legislation, as well as identified matters raised in the mutual valuation of Australia. So very quickly, the amendments expand the circumstances in which reporting entities may rely on customer identification and verification procedures undertaken by another reporting entity. Explicitly prohibit reporting entities from providing a designated service if customer identification procedures cannot be performed. Strengthen protections on correspondent banking, and expand exceptions to the prohibition on tipping off to permit reporting entities to share information relating to suspicious matters with external auditors and foreign members of their corporate group. Now, in response to these amendments, we've released 7 separate pieces of detailed guidance, including examples to assist stakeholders' understanding of these obligations, and they're all available on our website. So please check them out in more detail if you need to. Next, I'd like to talk about the financial crime environment, and in particular, how COVID's impacted that. The limitation on cross-border movements associated with the pandemic has created some obstacles for criminals, and we have therefore identified changing financial crime risks. For example, there's been a trend in the stockpiling of cash and the use of bulk cash transport. And some of these activities have enabled law enforcement disruption through large cash seizures linked to criminal activities. There's I think it was the start of the year, there's an example in the UK where law enforcement seized a significant amount of cash from criminals, and it was linked to certain crimes, and they asked the criminals, well, why have you got so much cash? And they said it's just too hard to get rid of at the moment. Now, that seems to be a trend around the world. The changed environment has provided opportunity, particularly in the online space. Reporting of cyber-enabled fraud, including frauds and scams, are being prevalent. And I'm sure you've also seen an increase yourselves with attempts to gain access to your systems or releasing personal information. We saw serious and transnational organised crime groups adapt to try and exploit the changing environment. For example, the provision of government stimulus programs in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, presenting new fraud opportunities for criminals. And to the credit of the reporting entities we regulate, many were quick to respond, and AUSTRAC supported this disruption by bringing key program delivery agents together with industry to discuss payment methods and then the misuse, leading to an increased number of suspicious matters. Now, to assist businesses, we've been very active in publishing materials so they understand the crimes in greater detail and risks posed to them. Now, these guides that I'm about to mention, they're quite helpful for anyone who's building solutions around risk and risk to reporting entities, because it goes into the detail about many of the crimes and how they could impact certain businesses. So financial crime guides on, for example, illegal wildlife trafficking. The guide includes methodologies and indicators relating to Australian wildlife at risk of trafficking. Fraud, which has included government stimulus program fraud. And for example, we worked in collaboration with the National Disability Insurance Agency around NDIS, fraud against the NDIS scheme. Trade-based money laundering, which remains a complex method of laundering, and we strongly supported work led by a joint Egmont Financial Action Task Force update on trade-based money laundering. And finally, cuckoo smurfing. That's a method of laundering money to disguise the integrated funds cross borders by relying on exploiting the accounts of customers expecting to receive legitimate funds. So they're all available on our website if you want to see a lot more detail. To give you a flavour of current work, we're aware that payment references are being increasingly used as a form of communication. Now, typically we'd use it and say happy birthday, or here's the money I owe you from dinner last night. Criminals are using it to avoid traditional communication devices in order to avoid law enforcement oversight, as well as they're using also people using it as a domestic violence situations, sending messages to people. Now, typically they use abusive language, criminal activity language, emojis, and often they're low value transactions and done frequently. Since June, we've released 5 further industry risk assessments, which provide comprehensive summaries of the risks faced by businesses. In June, a risk assessment on the non-bank lending and financing sector, which includes the buy now, pay later sector. And just this week, we've released 4 more risk assessments in the banking industry, foreign branches, foreign subsidiaries and domestic banks and Australia's major banks. There's over 300 pages of information there around the risks that they face. But you'll be happy to know there's also a snapshot to give you an overall high-level summary as well. Again, if risk as you go, there's a lot of information in there. These publications provide businesses with specific information on MLTF risk and is used by them to identify and disrupt financial crime. And we expect businesses to use them to inform their own assessment of risk and respond by way of strengthening their risk mitigation systems and controls. And finally, and very quickly, with the work we're doing with RegTech, while our 16,000 plus reporting entities are our key priority, we recognise the importance of an important role played by RegTech in providing solutions to the reporting entities that preventing their business from being exploited by financial crime. And we have a dedicated page on our website for RegTech. So this page includes guidance that outlines our expectations of RegTech, as well as guidance for businesses considering engaging a RegTech business. On that page, we also offer what we call ART sessions, ARTE, that's AUSTRAC RegTech engagement to individual businesses. And it's important to stress that these sessions are for businesses to understand more about who we regulate, why we regulate them, and the information about the obligations. We only provide general guidance, and these sessions are not an opportunity to market a product or an attempt to have AUSTRAC endorse a product. So please check that page out if you haven't seen that before, and we're happy to meet if you feel you wish to. Deborah, I'll pause there. That's my 10 minutes, I believe, and I'll hand back to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Richard. There is a question on the chat if you want to address that, and if not, we can take that offline. It's my very great pleasure now we've got 3 great RegTech solutions that we're about to see in rapid fire. So 6 minutes each they've got, and Alison's going to cut you off if you go a second over, just so that we give everybody time. So really delighted firstly to invite Andrew from First AML, Andrew Jackson from First AML, to the virtual podium. Your slide deck is there ready to go, and Hong is ready to move your slides. Thanks, Andrew.
Perfect. Thanks, Deborah, and everyone from RegTech. As Deborah mentioned, my name's Andrew Jackson. I'm the country manager for First AML here in Australia. For those of you who aren't too familiar with First AML, we're an end-to-end solution focused on the AML piece for complex KYC and KYB. So I think self-managed super funds, trusts, complex entities. It's way beyond just a simple EIV. Next slide, please, Hong. The gents on screen, there are 3 founders, and they've come from the frontline corporate and commercial banking. They were responsible for onboarding these complex entities, and they saw a huge gap in the way complex KYB or KYC was being done. And that's why First AML was founded, solve their pain point and probably some of yours. Next slide. Just some of the fantastic brands we work with here in Australia and in New Zealand. One of the main reasons they work with us, they know we're the ones who can handle all their complex KYB and easily scale as their business grows. Next slide. To frame the importance of this discussion, we were tagged in this tweet. It was a plea for help, pretty much. Mariana walked into a bank. She was told, "Nate, you've got to come back with an appointment." All she wanted to do was verify a couple of details. So this is the exact problem we're solving for small, medium and enterprise firms. We're digitizing it. We're removing that headache from the frontline staff, and we're providing a far higher level of customer experience. Next slide, please. So the case study. Large investment firm, you can see 8,000 plus complex onboardings per year. The problem statement we were faced with, we see this across many organizations. They've got multiple legacy systems, and frankly, they're not designed with a great customer experience in mind. They've kind of been bolted on top of each other. There's concerns over how to stay compliant as the number of complex onboardings grows. And staff time can really be spent better than just gathering these sorts of documents. So our mandate, pretty simple. Completely overhaul the way the complex KYC, KYB was done we've introduced that scalable onboarding solution so they can provide a better customer experience, and it's ensuring that compliance frontline staff, they understand the technology and they understand the new process. Next slide, please. Now, this is a little overwhelming, and I don't think that the firm truly understood the scope of their current onboarding process until one of the business analysts mapped this out for us. So you can see there's multiple touch points. I mean, depending on where you come in, there's different approval processes. And to say this was confusing for frontline staff is an understatement. So what did we transform this into? Next slide, please, Hong. This, far simpler as you can see, but really powerful. So we're able to do this because we're a blend of service and software. All frontline staff now have to do is either through a low touch, manually entering into our platform the entity they want verified, or via the API. Our team of expert analysts then pick up the pieces that cannot be automated. They maybe grab some of the sources of wealth or trust documents, and then based on the client's risk parameter for that individual entity, we will then collate everything and alert them that there is a case for approval. They simply check that approval, and then it moves through their system and the frontline staff get notified. And again, this can be done all via an API if that's your choosing. Next slide, please. Next slide, Hong, please. Oh, sorry, I just skipped the previous slide. So this is some of the results that came away from that. 79% reduction in onboarding. I think it's a huge time saving, which means they can not only onboard more clients, but there is a far superior customer experience because it takes less time. There's less back and forth, less document gathering because they missed something. That NPS score is for the firm's staff. So they not only love the platform, but they're more fulfilled because they're not just going back and forth, causing that customer pain, gathering documents. The third point, I think if we'd all agree that if we could save 55% off anything, we would do it. But this was across their AML related costs. And when you take into account there's 8,000 plus complex entities, that is an enormous saving. And the final piece here, it's one I haven't touched on at all yet, but we have built a network effect. And what we found is 1 in 4, so 25% of every single complex entity we were verifying for this firm was already in our system. All we had to do was request consent from the initial person or persons, do a quick PEP and sanction check, and then we could provide that. So that's a complex entity verified almost instantaneously. Now, look, I've covered quite a bit. If anyone would like to have a chat afterwards, please just drop me a note. But if there's any questions, please let me know. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. You touched on a couple of things that I think I raised during my presentation, and that's that whole idea about giving your people the very best tools to do their job. Well done. Okay, so we now have Ed Ball from Napier AI. Welcome to the virtual podium, Ed. We look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Deborah, and thank you, RegTech Association. Everyone, next slide, please. My name's Edward Ball, and I'm the Regional Sales Director for Napier, based in Sydney, Australia. This is what I'm going to go through today in terms of the rough agenda. Next slide, please. Just a little bit about Napier, those who don't know anything about us. Like a lot of organisations similar to Tesla, being named after Martin Tesla, we've been named after John Napier, who was a mathematician back in the 16th century, and he was largely responsible for introducing the logarithm as we know it today, and also introducing the use of the decimal point. So for those mathematicians that went to university, you might have come across John in your studies. Next slide, please. We're based in the UK, but we've got offices and staff right across the world, so USA, UK, Europe, Asia, and Africa, and Australia, of course. Thank you. Next slide, please. We've got about 200 customers across the globe. The areas that we tend to work in, obviously Europe and Asia Pacific are fairly big, closely followed by Australia and New Zealand in terms of where those customers sit. And in terms of the financial services sectors, banks are probably the sweetest spot, followed by asset managers, insurance companies, brokerage, etc. Next slide, please. Just a little bit about our board. There's about 200 years experience there. A lot of these people have worked in banks, worked as risk and compliance managers, COOs, etc. And Julian Dixon, who is our Chief Executive Officer. Napier was actually born out of his frustration of not being able to find a really good anti-money laundering and financial crime solution. Next slide, please. Just a brief of some of our clients. So we work in the banking area, payments, asset and wealth. Cryptos become very popular of late, gaming, foreign exchange and money transfers. So just a bit of an idea there of the logos. Next slide, please. Awards and recognition. We take our security seriously. So we've got ISO 27001 and SOC 2. And we've also been recognised as a good employer. We work with data providers, some of the enterprise level data providers, so we're data agnostic, but we work with the likes of Dow Jones, Refinitiv, LexisNexis, etc. And more recently, we've received some awards, but the one I'd like to highlight is Regulation Asia 2020, Best AML CTF Compliance Solution. Thank you. Next slide. So what are we going to talk about today in our case study? Well, it's really around this particular problem statement. When we're looking at transaction monitoring, client screening, and a full holistic solution, there are different impacts across the operation in terms of being dependent on vendors and expertise, costs in terms of legacy systems. There's also a new business impact in not being able to get insights into those activities and what's going on. And from a regulatory perspective, you want to make sure you're consistent and timely with your reports, and your monitoring is ongoing and detects any risks that are associated with your organisation. Next slide, please. So our particular case study is about a global tier 1 bank. They had an older system, probably about 5 or 6 years older, which was siloed and didn't necessarily share data between those different silos. They also weren't ongoing or looking at that holistic 360 or KYC review. And they'd actually received some warning from some regulators around they needed to show proof of that and to be able to do that effectively and on an ongoing basis. So when we spoke to them, we immediately thought of a particular component in our solution called the Client Activity Review, which pulls all that transaction data together in a nice user interface for you to ingest and investigate those abnormal activities with those clients after you have onboarded them and they have been transacting within your organisation. This saved them a lot of time and effort, provided efficiencies, and also created opportunities for the frontline staff to use that information to sell directly to those clients, and also providing operations with other streamlined areas and data flows. And it reduces basically overall up to about 65%. We're able to automate that standard cycle when you're reviewing your clients. And certainly around that periodic review, we're using data to drive that rather than simple timescales. Next slide, please. So let me show you how this is all brought together in our platform. So we're a bit like an iOS or an Android platform. You've got these particular modules, and you'll see some familiar ones if you do a lot of anti-money laundering and financial crime around transaction monitoring, client screening. We have our risk-based scorecard, our SDR builder, which allows you to automate those reports through to AUSTRAC, who were on earlier, transaction screening, and then the client activity review. And we've also got the artificial intelligence, which we use on top of the rules-based approach. Next slide, please. This is how it's all brought together amongst all those different components. All the attributes, the transaction activities, the data, events, the enterprise-wise audits, and the artificial intelligence. Next slide, please. This is a bit of a flow of how it would come in. We were talking about KYC earlier, and that would be brought in. We also do part of that with the screening, and then it comes in around the ongoing screening piece, the transaction screening, and it's all gathered in and it's all collected around our customer activity view. So that's where you get that holistic view of your customer, and we're able to identify any of those abnormal behaviours and trigger a review based on an abnormal behaviour after it's gone through the rules-based and also any AI layers that have been applied. Next slide, please. So what do we deliver? We help businesses reduce those false positives, false negatives. We reduce that investigation time. So what does that mean? Save you time and effort. We support that risk-based view that the regulators are encouraging businesses to do, reduce the operational costs. We hope to provide you with that agility and better insights. Next slide, please. And therefore, we've got some commercial benefits and efficiency benefits here. So Napier can provide you with that continuous change and update that customer behaviour and provide an ongoing holistic view of those customers. And that's it, I think. Next slide. Thank you very much. If anyone would like to ask any questions, my details are here. Thanks very much, Deb, for the opportunity.
Thanks, Ed. There is, I think, a question for you already on the chat, and I'll let you get onto that. It is very gratifying to see that when I write my presentations and without having the ability to see yours up front, it seems that, you know, we're touching on the same things. And I was just looking at the experience and expertise of your team, goes to the earlier points that I was making about, you know, the strength of this RegTech industry and the sheer amount of experience that we have at our fingertips. Thank you. Excellent presentation. So now, last but certainly not least, I'm now going to invite our old friend Sean Ryan from feedza. Welcome, Sean.
Thanks, Deborah. Thanks for that wonderful introduction. And hello, everybody. And also thanks, Hong, for clicking through the slides for us as we're going through. So look, my name is Sean Ryan. I'm head of financial crime strategy for feedza across APAC. I'm not a sales guy, so I've only taken one slide from marketing, and they're going to be quite disappointed with me. So Hong, if you can please click onto the ultimate marketing slide. Next one, please. Thank you. So we're a global company. We're 100% specialising in fraud and financial crime solutions. That's all we do. That's our focus. We were founded in 2011, reflecting on what Deborah said about the skill set. We were actually founded by people that were working in the European Space Agency. That's our roots from our founders. We have offices in 4 continents with a large team presence in Asia Pacific. We have offices in Hong Kong, Singapore, and here in Sydney. And if you look at some of those brands, I'm not going to spend much time on them, but look, they're tier 1 clients, you know, the most lucrative tier 1 brands you can get globally across all continents with the exception of Africa. Our office in Sydney is a local team. We're on the ground for end-to-end engagement, and we've been in the news recently through our Series D raise and valuation, which was in excess of 1 billion. That's the marketing piece. We're here to stay. So let's get on to the case study. Thanks. So click again. Brilliant. So about 12 years ago, our customers' fraud and AML landscape was challenging. Their investment in solutions were very reactive. For fraud, it usually happened with extreme urgency after a new product was launched, as new fraud occurred due to a lack of controls. Their financial crime investment was very similar. They had point solutions, they purchased them to meet regulatory requirements, and this resulted in multiple solutions from multiple different vendors. Now, as you can imagine, this was an absolute nightmare to manage. Not just from a vendor management perspective, but they had data everywhere, data silos. The cost of technology was extremely high. And it was just a really, really complex area. Next slide, please. So, you know, they said, right, with a little bit of experience and after a lot of pain, they created awareness. So it was quite a complex domain. They embarked on a strategy. So a good one, a very, very simple one, and one I absolutely endorse. To have an holistic approach to fraud and financial crime prevention. They attempted to select one vendor to partner with. Unfortunately, they experienced similar issues as before. So while the vendor's logo was the same, the solutions they provided were not truly integrated. They struggle to share data, struggle to share hardware and resources. Making changes became so cumbersome that multiple college industries popped up throughout the organization. Teams built hacks to keep the business going. Little empires started to form. In some cases, even for support, our customers felt like they were talking to different companies. They had an absolute inconsistent experience. When they applied for input to the roadmap, the story was also inconsistent. The truth was, it wasn't a true holistic solution, nor was it a true partnership. They were struggling with multiple software versions, keep up to date with the software, and in some cases they found out quite late the technology was going to be sunset. So where are they now? Next slide, please. So they have the same strategy. It's a great strategy. It's a very, very simple strategy, except one change. They mandated one vendor for one platform. They partnered with us with feedza a few years ago. The strategy is real. What I'm sharing with you is tangible. It's not vaporware. It's a single view of fraud and financial crime with the appropriate controls across the full customer lifecycle using the best available technology today. They've implemented fraud and AML monitoring through a single platform, single consistent user experience, and payment screening. They're in the process of planning to implement our digital trust offering and new customer screening capability. This will enable a true 360-degree view of fraud and financial crime risk across the entire customer's lifecycle. Their investigators and data analysts are on the same platform, same look and feel, same user experience. Our offering is all in the cloud, so they're always up to date with the latest version. They get the latest functionality with full remote support for business and technical queries. The customer is reaping the rewards of this partnership. We've got significant reduction in false positive rates on all use cases, especially financial crime. Fraud losses are dramatically reduced. New products and services are rolled out with the risk function now being seen as an enabler of business, not a preventer of business. And importantly, the customer experience with their customers is absolutely fantastic. This is a real, tangible differentiator. And next slide, please. So thank you all very much for your attention. It's been a real pleasure. Thanks to RegTech, thanks to Hong. And I'll leave you with the details for our regional executive, Tom, for his contact details, should you want to reach out and get any further details. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Sean. Yeah, many of those points are resonating with many of the people on the line today. No doubt 360-degree view of financial crime risk is something, badly needed. I would encourage you to please, put some questions on the chat, and I'm going to ask the presenters today to go online and answer those as they can. That's the last part of the presentation. Unless somebody would like to ask a question, and I'll give you a few seconds if you wanted to pop your camera on and ask a question of one of the speakers. But otherwise, I might go to wrap up. But what I will also offer right until 5:30, we'll stay online if you want to just hang about once we close off to stop for a chat. You'd be very welcome to do so. So if there are no questions, to the points where I started out on this presentation today, collaboration across the ecosystem is really important. And so what we've heard today is, we've talked about the industry, we've talked about the importance of getting these tools to your people to help manage these risks. We've talked about the experience and the robust nature of the RegTech vendors that we've been able to present to you today. Richard invited people on the call to engage with the regulator and gave you some ways that you can do that. And then finally, we finished off. We always like to finish off with some practical examples so that you can see the track record of these companies and some examples of how they're putting their RegTech to work. So finally, I would love it if you could fill in our satisfaction survey, because that helps us fine-tune these events and what we offer. And then last but not least, we have got a bunch of new events coming up. They're all listed on this slide. In particular, you'll see that we've actually got one on AML CTF coming up on the 30th of September and again on the 28th of October. And that's to the point that I was making earlier. We have, quite a lot of, we've got a rich universe in this space. So please come along and see those firsthand. We will have our awards towards the end of this year, regrettably probably not in a face-to-face that we were hoping and planning, but we will do that later in the year. And then we also have government as a bar of RegTech that we're looking to schedule early in December. So I think that is the final slide for the deck. Yes, it is. So I will stay online for the next few minutes if anybody would like to stop by and have a chat, but otherwise, please give us your ranking for the event and I will call a formal close. We can stop the recording and I'll just stay online if anybody would like to turn on the camera.